everybody. I'm going to make today's intro super duper short and sweet. If you don't know me already, I'm Imagine. I'm just one of your hosts here that works with the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council and the Southern chapter of the ISA. Today, we are joined by Chris Graves, and he's going to talk to us about summer tree ID. I have a really quick synopsis about Chris's background. He is a UT Extension Forestry and a wildlife specialist and certified wildlife biologist. He has also worked for the School of Natural Resources since 2013, and he is a graduate of UT. But he's got a lot of experience. He's been on with us before. I'm personally very excited to hear about all of the tips and tricks that he has for us today. And Katie, I'll pass it back to you for housekeeping, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Imagine. So, everyone, if you logged on today to seek ISA CEUs and SAF CFEs, please make sure that you are registered. And if you are not a member of TUFC, please make sure you paid the $10 fee and that your full name is showing to get credit. If it's not showing, you can change that by going down to the Participants tab and finding your name and clicking on the three little dots and changing it to whatever name you registered with, and that just makes it easier for us to figure out who is seeking those ISA CEUs or SAF CFEs. If you're a general attendee, you don't have to worry about payment. And again, if you're a TUFC member, you don't have to worry about payment. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please enter those in the chat and we will get to those at the end. And Imagine, I think that's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, Chris, we'll let you take it away. Again, as you have questions, fill those in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end today. So, Chris, take it away.
All right, yeah, thank you so much. Some of you may remember I did a webinar on winter tree ID, and then they asked me to come back to do a part two, and then Neil called me Tom Brady, so that didn't go over well because I'm a UT grad, and I was here when Peyton Manning was here, so I'm not a Tom Brady fan. But I did come back now for this, and I'm kind of regretting it because putting together this summer tree ID. Yeah, that we'll see how it goes, but this has been difficult at best. Mainly because it's really hard to fit in this content within less than an hour. So I'm going to do my best. I may fly through some slides, but try not to go too fast. This is where it all started for me. You can see there's a summer key to trees of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Two renowned botanists there, Dr. Shanks and Dr. Sharp, who were at Tennessee for quite some time. But this was something that I was given during my dendrology course, and it really changed my life forever. And I've taught dendro at UT. I did for about 10 years in the spring. So we started with winter dendrology and kind of ended with the leaves. But either way, I think this tree ID stuff is potentially life-changing and can really enhance your quality of life. This is something that I do every day. So I'm looking at trees as I'm driving down the road. I've planted thousands, maybe tens of thousands of trees. Yeah, at this point, I don't know if I'm at 100,000 yet, but I've also intentionally killed a lot of trees and done a lot of forest restoration, forest management. So I'm always working in trees. Here's two of my favorite field guides. One is almost pocket size. The U.S. Forest Service put it together there on the left. And then the one on the right, I think it was Dr. Samuelson from Auburn that put this one together, but it's really good. I don't know if you can find them, but feel free to take a little snapshot of them if you're interested. But I think this is where it all starts for us, is somebody gives you that field guide, and that potentially, if you take what they give you and you read it and then you put it into action, it can really lead to good things. The Samuelson Field Guide, the Forest Trees one, I like it. It's a book, and when you open the book, you can see you've got everything you need there for Castanea pumila, Allegheny chinkapin, which is dwarf chestnut, but a really cool shrub, more of a shrub than a tree. But it's a great book. And then this is where we all should start. So some of this may be repetitious, I guess, from the last couple talks, but I just want to remind everybody, You really need to know where you are on the landscape. And of course, I tell our students to study range maps if they're getting ready to go do an interview in Florida or Indiana or some other state. I tell them to really look through range maps for not just trees, but birds, mammals, fish, reptiles, amphibians, just to kind of do their homework and be better prepared. Here's longleaf pine. The other one was table mountain pine, isolated primarily the Appalachians. But longleaf pine, of course, dominated the coastal plain. And I worked extensively in the deep south, actually, and I've spent most of my career working throughout the southeast. But the deep south is a special place, and I was challenged to learn a lot of the trees there. And then other considerations here, physiographic province, where are you at? You can see that little physiographic provinces map of Tennessee and how biodiverse the state is from the mountains to the Mississippi River. So we have lots of diversity, whether we talk about trees or freshwater mussels and fish. It's really off the charts as far as the species diversity. The aquatic biodiversity is second to none. And then upland versus lowland, real important to know. Am I on the hill or am I down in a floodplain system? Is it a dry site, a xeric site, or more of a wet site, mesic? Thinking about soils, this is kind of where it all gets, if you think about geology and then soils, you're building up then to your plant community. So understanding soils is very important, and knowing, which soils support which tree species is vitally important, whether you're planting or managing a natural forest. And in other environmental conditions, if you think about, a lot of things at play. For example, in our high elevation mountains of the Appalachians, above 5,500 feet, which isn't much for those of you that live in the Rockies, but over here, it's high elevation. We get in our spruce fir forest, so you have very harsh conditions, lots of snow and wind, and that's going to impact your plant community drastically. So understanding those other environmental conditions at play, past land use, that can be hard, but you can generally start to figure things out if you ask the right people, and study the landscape and the vegetation that's currently there. And then range maps, so what naturally occurs in your location. So important considerations. And then groupings. This is something that I've mentioned before, but it's more of a community level approach. You can see the SAF, Society of American Foresters, Forest Cover Types book. That's for the US and Canada. It's not outdated. It's really good, and quite useful. And then this is a newer field guide I like a lot, this Wildflowers and Plant Communities. It's of the Southern Appalachians and Piedmont, but it's very good as well, kind of taking that community level approach. And then that field guide that I just mentioned, the Wildflowers one, this is it. I just opened it up, took a picture. Sorry you can't see it well, but notice that plant community there, the pine oak heath community of higher elevations here in the Appalachians. And then if you look at the vegetation, you can see, the species composition talks about some of those dry site oak species like scarlet oak and chestnut oak. And then you have the various yellow pines that you'd find there. Higher elevation would be table mountain pine, mid elevation would be pitch pine, and then sort of the lower mountains you start to pick up Virginia pine, so and shortleaf pine. So these are your dominant tree species, and then you'll have all these associated species within these forest cover types or vegetation types. Here's just something to consider. I worked also in West Tennessee with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and this is vitally important when you're managing a floodplain forest, bottomland hardwood forest. And you can hopefully see there on the left the stream or river channel. And then, of course, particularly in those floodplains out there, you got a lot of sand and just soft soils, less rock, really hardly any rock at all. So those rivers are constantly changing course. You end up with these large sand deposits, and this could happen just with an overnight major rain event or storm event. And of course, you have species starting to colonize those areas, such as river birch, black willow, eastern cottonwood. And then, of course, you've got this kind of first levee, and then it drops off. You can see the associated species based on elevation. So elevation really drives that, that hydrology and, of course, the response and which trees naturally occur across those elevation gradients. And in there are the curveballs. So this is a repeat from last time. Some of my best friends are in horticulture. They're plant scientists, but they drive me crazy because they continue to plant things from other countries. I don't know why. Seems like after the American chestnut, we would have learned our lesson not to plant or bring in foreign plant materials. But we continue to do so, and it's unfortunate. Someday they may realize that we need to always be planting native. It's just wise in so many respects, whether it's water conservation and, of course, trying to protect our native plant communities here in North America. So, yeah, be aware when you visit college campuses, public libraries, old home sites. There may be those curveballs, some of those species that may not be native that you need to be on the lookout for. So you don't have to have a degree in horticulture, but just be aware. You may be looking at a European beech and not an American beech, for example. And then we do have a lot of non-native invasive plant species, not just because of horticulture, but even the forestry and wildlife profession in general. And of course, just people that sitting in their homes and ordered some plant from Europe that has now taken off. But be aware, a lot of non-native plants on the landscape, and be on guard. Thankfully, we've got some new technology that a lot of you are taking advantage of already, but I generally use Seek. It's free, and that's the reason I use it. But also, I use it to kind of test myself and test the app. And I would say the app is correct or accurate about 85% of the time. It doesn't pick up everything. Of course, I'm looking at other plants such as grasses and legumes and things like that. But it's a great opportunity to get people excited about tree ID, but also a helpful resource if you're not quite sure. It may know exactly what you're on, and then you can dig even deeper into some of these apps to get more information. And then I always want to suggest you prepare before you go. So field guides, looking at range maps, and also the web soil survey, the USDA NRCS web soil survey. If you're not familiar with it, they have these forest land productivity tables, so you can delineate the area that you'll be visiting, and then this is great information that's in the old handbooks that USDA NRCS had, the old Soil Conservation Service, but now it's online. It's at your fingertips. Take advantage of these forest land productivity tables. Lots of good information there. And then I'd say tools that you need. I've gone over this before, but I can't stress enough, the pocket knife, getting into some of this, looking at the inner bark of trees, getting the sap odors off of a twig. Pocket knife definitely comes in handy. And of course, you can cut your apple up if you're carrying that with you in the woods. The magnifier, so a hand lens, super important. You can see this gentleman, he's got his hat on backwards. He's got that hand lens right up against his eye. And that's how you use it, and you bring that object in until it's perfectly in focus. And then, of course, binoculars, I say, would be a must, not just with landscape trees, but particularly in the forest when you're trying to do the summer tree ID, and you're looking at leaves closely. Even with winter ID, though, you can look at twigs, the arrangement, even see buds and stuff with a good pair of binoculars. And you can get some really nice binoculars for 100, 200 bucks. All right, so here we go. This is a black cherry, and a black cherry you can see on this particular specimen. It's got the red petioles, but it's a simple alternate leaf. And the reason I have it on here, oh, I skipped. Yeah, the reason I have it on here with the pocket knife is because you can use that pocket knife and get into those sap odors. And just right away, you would know, oh, that's black cherry because it's got the cyanide. It actually becomes full cyanide kind of after you cut it, or after you've injured or cut a branch. And if you're not aware, it can kill a full-size cow. So you don't want to be trimming cherry trees over a pasture someday. But just wanted to point out then that pocket knife can come in handy to get those sap odors, especially with something like black cherry. And then the underside of the leaves of black cherry have the pubescence or hairs along the midrib, and they'll either be yellow or orange in color. You'll notice on the petiole of the leaf, at the leaf base, right at the leaf base, that lower right, you can see the glands, 1 to 2 glands. And of course, the leaf overall, it's got a sharp tip, it's mostly oval in shape, and it's finely serrate. So we'll get into some of that in a minute, but don't forget your pocket knife. And then next up, we've got our oaks. These are 2 red oak species. Black oak, Quercus velutina, is on the left, and then we have willow oak is on the right. And they have the red oak group, the subgenus red oaks, they have bristle tips. So real important to look at that. And oftentimes, or sometimes, it's going to be more helpful to have a hand lens, to really take a good look. And then this is just an example of what? Well, it's that willow oak I showed you. You can see this is a magnification, so now you can see it much better. The bristle tip on the underside of the leaf of and from the underside of the leaf of willow oak. And then we've got 2 leaves that look very similar. Yeah, the one on the left is chinkapin oak, and chinkapin oak has more of a sharp toothed margin. And it's in the white oak group. So without a hand lens, you may not know that it doesn't have bristle tips. And then on the right, we have another one with kind of a wavy margin, but it's more rounded, doesn't come to a sharp tip. So that's chestnut oak. So again, we've got over here on the left, we have chinkapin oak. Over here on the right, we have chestnut oak. And but when you break out your hand lens, you'll see, yeah, there are no bristles at the end of this. These are 2 white oaks. So white oaks do not have bristle tips. And both of these species are in that subgenus for white oak. But notice with a hand lens, if you look closely at the chinkapin oak, you'll see it has these callous tips. It'll be hard to see that just with a naked eye. Whereas chestnut oak doesn't have that. It just has the rounded teeth or margin. But then, of course, don't forget, you've got the rest of the tree. Most of the time, I work in extension, and I know particularly our county agents and NRCS employees that are out there, they're all the time getting something that some farmer's dropping off. He's had it on the dash of his pickup truck in a Ziploc bag for 3 weeks and brings it to you and expects you to be able to identify it. But hopefully, if you're in the woods, it's better to be outside than inside. But that's why I got in this profession. But anyhow, yeah, when you're outdoors and you have the tree right in front of you, sometimes it's just real obvious to use some of those winter characteristics like I went over before. So yeah, you can see on the left, this is a chinkapin oak with more of the scaly bark, almost bark that's more similar to Quercus alba white oak. And then on the right, you can see the more blocky bark, the tall ridges and the deep furrows of chestnut oak. And then we have swamp chestnut oak and chestnut oak. So just throwing some of these things out there, I think it's important to see. Swamp chestnut oak kind of blooms out, but it too, that swamp chestnut oak has that wavy margin on the outside of the leaf. And then chestnut oak has a wavy margin as well. They look real similar, don't they? I think they do. But again, this is where the hand lens comes in handy. Swamp chestnut oak will have the callous tip teeth, whereas chestnut oak does not. But if you think about the sites, swamp chestnut oak occurs primarily in a swamp. So a marsh is not dominated by trees, but a swamp is technically dominated by trees. And one of the trees within particular swamps in West Tennessee, you will find in one of those elevational zones, swamp chestnut oak. Whereas chestnut oak, the scientific name is Quercus montana, Montana meaning mountain, so it's found up on top of the mountain or dry ridges. So the site conditions are totally different where you're going to find them. The only curveball then is when people start planting swamp chestnut oak in our landscape areas. And so be on the lookout for that. But then if you see some, the bark is totally different. So swamp chestnut oak has that kind of flaky bark, whereas again, the blocky bark of chestnut oak on the right. And then consider the sun and shade leaves. So plants need to photosynthesize. So trees, particularly the leaves that are in shaded areas, they tend to be even huge. And this is not a perfect example. The one on the left is a scarlet oak, but the scarlet oak leaves, these are much larger on the left than normal. So these are shade leaves, again, trying to gather as much of that sunlight as possible for photosynthesis. And then on the right, what do we have? Well, we got two pictures. So on the right, you have sort of the classic leaves you would see in a field guide. That's what an artist is going to draw. That's what most of the pictures or photographs people are taking are of those sun leaves. So the sun leaves are more of the classic leaf shape that we're used to, but you're not going to be able to see them if you're in a forested environment. Not too many people plant scarlet oak. So when you're in the woods, you need those binoculars to be able to look up at those sun leaves and really get a good look at more of a classic leaf as one of the characteristics, at least, that you're trying to use to identify the tree. I want to throw in there, be careful, because sometimes when we do this, you may have a giant poison ivy vine or some other vine with leaves, and that might throw people off that are, we're looking from the ground. And then here we go, another one, sun versus shade leaves. So the shade leaves are on the left. That's northern red oak. You can see they're just gigantic. And versus the sun leaves on the right, that's more of that classic leaf shape you'd see in a field guide. Let's go back. So scarlet oak, you'll see the lobes are long. That's on the outside. And then you have sinuses. So when you think sinuses, think deep inside your face. That's where your sinus cavity is within that bone structure. So the sinuses are deep and almost all the way to the midrib. And if you hold that leaf up to your face, you can still see with a sun leaf of a scarlet oak, you can see out and kind of mask your face, but your eyes are not blocked at all by the leaf surface. Versus a northern red oak, you'll notice it has somewhat deep sinuses, but they only go about halfway to the midrib, not almost all the way to the midrib. So these are kind of fine differences when you're trying to identify trees by leaves, and particularly trees that sometimes occur together. Now here we go with terminology. I'm going to kind of fly through this. If I don't, we'll be here all day. But you'll notice this is a dichotomous key. Just an example here on the right. But terminology is critical if you get into sort of scientific study of trees, which we call dendrology. But if you're using some of these books and field guides, but especially if you're using a dichotomous key should not be hard. And do know, I taught for about 10 years before I got into extension here at UT. And students have trouble with it, but really the trouble is they don't understand the terminology. You have to learn the terminology first if you're going to use this roadmap to get to where you need to go, which is down to the species level. So terminology is so important. I can't, harp on that enough, but really think about that if you get into the real study and particularly trying to use a dichotomous key. Otherwise, it'd be frustrating and yeah. So next up, walk you through this. This is just, a leaf, and that leaf blade, as you can see, has the apex, which is the top tip or the apex of the leaf there at the top. You have the leaf margin, and then you have the veins, which we say venation. And then, of course, there's a midrib and then the leaf base. Then the leaf has a petiole, okay, and that petiole is going to attach to the twig. And then some leaves will have stipules, these leafy appendages that'll leave leaf scars on twigs. But anyhow, that's kind of the parts of a leaf. And then we get into the sinuses, like I mentioned before. Those are on the inside, and then the lobes are on the outside. But moving on to this, we have simple leaves, that's one leaf blade, versus a compound leaf, which is one leaf with multiple leaflets. And I won't go into all the details of that. I think most of y'all are experts, but who knows? Then we get into leaf arrangement. So I'm just mainly pointing out a few things here. This is the stuff that's usually at the front of your book, which means you shouldn't skip it and go straight, just flip through pages of your field guide. Spend some time here to learn this. So you have various leaf arrangements, alternate and opposite and whorled. And then we have palmately compound leaves. We have pinnately compound leaves, and in some cases bipinnately and tripinnately compound leaves. And then we've got a variety of leaf margins. And some of these words are foreign to us because they have, kind of Latin roots. And I don't want to offend anybody, but Latin is a dead language. But it's important in science, and we use it a lot. So I've got a lot of Latin words up here. I actually took a course in undergrad, and it was a great class, just learning the meanings of some of these words. It really helped with ichthyology and mammalogy and all these other courses where I was having to learn Latin. And then we have the leaf apices, the apex or the top or tip of each of those leaves. You can see different words there. Leaf bases, again, more words. And then leaf shapes, more usually foreign words. So we have this almost scientific jargon, and it can be tough for students, right out of the gate. And then we have different types of venation. So you have pinnate, arcuate, palmate, parallel. So grasses, for example, grass blades have parallel venation. But I think the main thing, now we're transitioning. I went through that kind of quickly, but that's something you can spend time on, make flashcards, and learn the meaning of some of those words. I try not to use them too much, particularly because now I'm in extension, and I'm supposed to be able to, I shouldn't be using too much Latin. I'll just say that. But don't get caught up in the leaves. That's one of the main things. I think that's what most time people do. And our students that actually take the spring dendrology class, they can't, except for, pines and spruces and some of those other species that retain their leaves, the evergreens like southern magnolia and some of those. So I think, they almost end up with a better start because the leaves are difficult, and really the DNA fingerprint of a tree is the buds. I'll stand by that. But leaves can be helpful in tree identification, no doubt. But this is to show, this is Quercus alba white oak, and look at the leaf variation. This is one species, variable leaves, each one extremely unique. And you can see then maybe why this would be really challenging, just relying on leaves to identify trees. So don't forget, there are other parts to a tree. So for example, you can see at the top there, looking at terminal buds, lateral buds, twigs, leaf scars, looking at the bark of a tree, looking for seeds, that can all be extremely helpful. So don't rely on one characteristic. All right, here we go. So spring through summer, we've got bud break. And typically here in the Southern Appalachians, one of the first trees to flower is downy serviceberry. A lot of folks from the mountains call it sarvis. But either way, it's a really nice tree. Beautiful white flowers that are somewhat showy because they stand out in an otherwise very kind of gray or dark landscape without foliage. So I think what I want to say here, I would just take time, and teaching dendrology has forced me, especially teaching it in the spring semester, to really pay attention to details and really watching trees and observing trees and spending time, collecting and stuff, January through December and through those seasons, just kind of keeping track of what's about to happen and what's going on out there. And then, of course, we have some flowers. This is southern red oak. So these are oak flowers, and they can be somewhat messy. But folks, who knows? They may bag these up, put them in a Ziploc, and bring them to your office and say, what is this? It's all over, my patio. So flowers can be a little messy sometimes, particularly those from oak. And then think about, the first tree species that maybe leafs out. And in our area, here in the mountains at least, it's I think most often what I've seen is yellow buckeye. So yellow buckeye tends to leaf out earlier than other species. So you'll see those buds swelling pretty quick. And then it also tends to lose its leaves first. So first one to leaf out, but also the first one to lose its leaves, yellow buckeye. Palmately compound leaves, opposite leaf arrangement, kind of an easy one to ID, and it's a stately tree over here versus when I worked in West Tennessee, we had red buckeye that's more of a shrub. And then think about the leaves after bud break. So they're going to go through a lot of changes. They're light green here. This is American beech. So American beech, we have light green color. That allows for that sunlight to kind of penetrate those chloroplasts, and which, you think about chlorophyll or the green color in leaves and allowing for photosynthesis. So you got a lot going on here from a tree physiology standpoint. And those young leaves, though, I will say, are usually real soft. Many species will have like silky white hairs that they may not have later on. They're thinner, so they're totally different, kind of right out of those buds. But then they start to thicken up, they start to harden, they start to look more like maybe how it's described in a field guide. So this is still American beech, and you can see the veins. Each vein ends in a sharp tooth that has that little tip there, that bristle tip. And in late summer, they're really thick. They're maybe somewhat leathery but smooth, and they're darker green. So just keep that in mind. The other thing that you're seeing here with American beech, and again, this is American beech, look at those buds. So by late summer, they're starting to form buds. They're starting to prepare for dormancy. A lot of oaks in particular, and American beech is in that family. But either way, they start to set that terminal bud. Once they set a terminal bud, it's over. They're not going to grow anymore. And around here, that's usually happening around about September or so in Tennessee. Thankfully, with American beech, this helps with ID. They'll have these marcescent leaves, so they retain their leaves into the wintertime, and then they kind of get pushed out in the spring. But it's one of those species that you'll see leaves kind of holding on, those dead leaves in the winter. When the wind's blowing, makes a kind of a neat sound. But of course, with American beech and ID, I think, bark ID is pretty simple. So when you're in the woods and you see American beech, you can ID it from a distance. You don't even have to look at the leaves. And then figure out, what it's not. So here we go. We're kind of, again, just trying to categorize things. That's the way our brains work. But as you're going through these processes, it's important to look at range maps, particularly when you're working in a natural setting, but also going through, the mad buck, which would include the viburnums, or Caprifoliaceae is something else a lot of people have learned maybe in college. But that MAD is just an acronym for maple, ash, dogwood. And then we have the buckeyes. Some of you may have horse chestnut on your list. We have viburnums, which may also include elderberry. But either way, there's a lot to this, but we just try to simplify it to say, okay, if you're going to use leaves with summer ID, then know which ones have opposite leaf arrangement. And these are the ones, the mad buck and the viburnum. So they have opposite leaf arrangement, and that way we're kind of narrowing down the list. Another thing is it an angiosperm, such as a flowering plant or tree, like in the case of an oak, or is it a gymnosperm, which is kind of a naked seed plant, and it's something like a pine. It may be a cedar, maybe a spruce or a fir, may even be a yew or something else. So yeah, the gymnosperms, I'm not going to spend much time on them. Really, this is it, because we've already had, I think, a couple of these webinars, and I got into more depth with these. And I love pines, in particular, the yellow pine group and the cypresses. So I would love to spend the rest of the time on those, but we don't have time for it. So make a list, break things down, make it more manageable. So when you think about it, you're breaking this list down. Now it's shorter, it's more manageable. of where you're at, where you're going to visit, maybe go on vacation or where you're working, visiting the landowner, that kind of thing. So if you look at some of the pines in our area, I've made a list. There's 6 species, and once you boil it down to six, it's not too bad. And most of our students that are super successful in labs, and particularly on the lab practicals that we give them, they've all built their own PowerPoint. So they use Google Images. They're looking for, good pictures, maybe even not so perfect pictures, but all the ones that, are clicking. They're developing a search image then as they're doing that. They don't even realize it. And then they're putting these PowerPoints together, maybe making them like flashcards. But this can be a game changer as far as a good way to study trees. So rapid fire, we're going to run through a list of species, focusing primarily on the summer. And I'm going to start with unique and easy, and you'll see, well, maybe. So maybe it's easy. American holly, this is an evergreen. These leaves tend to persist for a few years, but they've got these sharp spines. So if you've ever mowed or weed eated, like I had to growing up, try not to do much of that anymore. You know all about American holly leaves. Pretty easy to identify. Yellow poplar, somebody on the internet did a great job of drawing a cat. I'm not a big cat fan. They're fine as long as they're inside your home, but not outside your home because they do kill everything, most of the time for fun. But you'll notice the cat face on the right, and a lot of people will say the yellow poplar or tulip tree, the leaves are shaped more like a cat's face. So I think this one's kind of easy, simple, alternate arrangement. But don't forget to pay attention to some of these things. So yellow poplar is one of those species, and there aren't a ton of them, that have stipules, those leafy appendages in the summer, and they, of course, have big or really nice showy flowers that actually deer like to eat. And then we have this fan-shaped leaf of American sycamore, kind of an easy one. The underside is heavily pubescent, but fan-shaped. Generally, you'll have 3 to 5 lobes. But don't forget to, again, investigate. So it's unique because the petiole is hollow that surrounds this bud, the lateral buds that are underneath. And you won't know it unless you pluck it off. And it's another one, though, that has stipules. And then we've got some leaves that look like, for example, this is Native American arrowhead, the real thing up on the top left. But here's an arrowhead-shaped leaf, river birch. It's got coarse teeth, shaped like an arrowhead, usually near water. And then we have Southern Magnolia. Again, it's in kind of an easy category because usually if our students see it once, they generally know it if they put forth much effort at all. Evergreen, large leaves, thick, leathery, dark green above. Underneath, you've got that rusty pubescence, but a really nice tree in the landscape, but also in the woods. And then, of course, these perfectly sweet smelling flowers on the left. If you've ever gone to like an old lady's Bible study, they'll usually have these in their living room or den when they're having their study. And then, of course, they have these what appear like grenades. I used to bite these off and throw them at my cousins and neighbors and friends growing up. But it's a follicle, so these magnolia follicles are real showy in the summer. Here's some more magnolias, just throw them out there. These have giant leaves. And the umbrella magnolia is the one on the top left and the very top. And I'm doing pretty good. So I'm looking at my time, sorry. But umbrella magnolia, it's called umbrella because the leaves are on the terminal end or the sort of the twig end. And it makes it to where, if you cut it off, then you could hold it above your head like an umbrella. It doesn't work great. I did a lot of black bear trapping in the Smokies and through all kinds of weather and particularly rainstorms. And it works okay, but you'll still get soaked. The bottom one there is big leaf magnolia. So I don't know if you notice some of these subtle differences, but one of the main ones is the leaf base. So if you look at the leaf base of that top left leaf, umbrella magnolia, tripetella, it tapers to a point. Whereas the bottom leaf there on the bottom right, it doesn't taper. It actually has these big lobes. So think like a big man, maybe a sumo wrestler, got big earlobes. So big leaf magnolia. And then you can see, again, spring and summer, pretty exciting time as far as flowering. We should stop and pay attention to these things We really should, and we're fortunate. I think most of you probably working outdoors and in the woods, so be thankful for that. But look at look at these beautiful flowers. This is umbrella magnolia flower here, top left, and then on the far right you can see the follicles. Again, real showy. The seeds are full of fats and oils, and a lot of migratory songbirds eat those seeds. And then the bottom two pictures are from big leaf. And then we've got Fraser magnolia. The leaves aren't quite as big, so maybe just slightly bigger than your hand, but not huge, like your torso. So if you look at the bottom left photo, maybe you can see it better, but the leaf base has smaller lobes. So like a smaller man by the name of Fraser. So Fraser was a famous botanist, and I've not heard too many good things about him, but I don't want to throw him under the bus. Next up, we've got sweet gum. So again, we're on that easy category, or supposed to be. But this is a star-shaped leaf. You can see finely serrate leaf margin, long petioles, but again, star-shaped. And look at the veins. Each vein kind of going out to, those lobe tips. So this should be a pretty easy one, and it depends on what you have. So the one on the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lobes. The one on the left has 7. So usually 5 to 7 lobes. But pay attention, spring and summer, to these flowers and everything that's happening. I think a lot of people get out and they're mowing and running a leaf blower, whatever, and they don't pay any attention to what they're mowing over. What's on the driveway. So there you got the male flowers on the top of that twig end, and then the female flower there on the bottom, hanging there next to the old seed pod, that sweet gum ball. And then we have sassafras. Sassafras has multiple lobes, kind of a soft leaf, and a real nice green. Not dark, not light, but almost a bluish green color to the leaves. Students really like this one, maybe because it has a single or double or triple lobe. Some of them look like a catcher's mitt, so that's neat. There you go, catcher's mitt. And then if you break it, though, you crush those leaves. Again, pay attention to those odors, because this has a real sweet fragrance to it. And then we've got the poison ivy tree on the left. That's kind of a trashy tree, but box elder has weak wood, and box elder is one of the maples. It has a compound leaf, so those are 3 leaflets you're looking at. But it'll have 3 to typically 7 leaflets. I think sometimes 9, but that's pretty rare. But those 3 outer leaflets, as you see, really match up with the poison ivy leaflet you see on the right. So box elder, maple, found in floodplains, and kind of an easy one to ID. Got opposite leaf arrangement because it's part of that mad bug. It's one of the maples. Yeah, there you go. There's more box elder leaves, but then here's the thing. Don't forget, look at the twigs. So box elder has those Kermit the Frog green twigs, and they are hard to miss. So if you look beyond the leaf and start looking at other parts of the tree, that can be very helpful. And then here's flowering dogwood. I put it on the easy list because it's opposite leaf arrangement: maple, ash, dogwood. So dogwoods are on that list. And this is flowering dogwood, but it has arcuate veination. So those veins actually bend or arc up toward the apex of the leaf, or the top of the leaf. So anyhow, a lot of people are aware of that one. But then you compare it to the one on the right, and you're like, man, that's the same thing, but it's not. So we have flowering dogwood on the left, and then on the right we have silky dogwood. So what's the difference? Well, flowering dogwood, a lot of you are familiar with the flowers. They're some of the first to kind of bloom here in the Tennessee Valley around April. And then they form this fruit that a lot of people are familiar with, versus silky dogwood has flowers that are kind of clustered, so they're not as showy. Let's go back to flowering dogwood. Those beautiful petals and everything. To now all of a sudden we got this cluster of these tiny flowers, and that's what you see on the ends of the twigs for silky dogwood, that has totally different fruit. That's kind of a bluish in color, and clustered there on the ends of those twigs. And then when you get into the twigs, flowering dogwood, the female flowers or the flower buds of flowering dogwood, they've got they're onion shaped, I guess. And then the male buds are shaped kind of like a crawfish or crayfish claw. And then if you look at the twigs of silky dogwood, there's some similarities, but they tend to be bright red. And then we've got willow. So I'm not going to cover weeping willow. It's non-native. Don't plant it. And then we've got black willow, though, a real important species ecologically here throughout Tennessee and much of the southeastern U.S. So it has lance-shaped leaves, so sharp-pointed, kind of lanceolate is what they say, but lance-shaped, and finely serrate margin. Very unique, as you can see on the left, even from a distance, you should be able to spot and identify maybe a cluster of black willows growing on the bank of a pond. But then the other thing are the red glands. So this is where that magnifier comes in. This isn't a great picture, but it's pretty good, I think, from LSU. But it has the red glands there on the teeth of black willow. And then here's another species from that family. So same family, different genus and species. We have eastern cottonwood, which have the triangular leaves, but notice it too has glands. So you can see the glands there at the base of the leaf at each of those margin tips. All right. And then the other thing to mention, I think I have it coming up. Yeah, is it has eastern cottonwood has a long petiole, and that petiole, particularly near the leaf base, is flat. So these leaves tend to kind of shake in the wind, which makes it unique. And of course, eastern cottonwood's named after all the many cotton-like seeds that it produces, which happened here on campus not too long ago, about a month. Devil's walking stick has really the largest leaf, and it's a compound leaf, but it is bipinnately compound, but even tripinnately compound. But notice here on the slide that the diamond above it. So the silhouette of that leaf is almost diamond shaped. And these are great trees. They're small, that's native to at least our region. So highly recommend this in landscaping. If you're planting, produces nice flowers and fruit, soft mass that many wildlife species eat. I don't want to get into too many details of that, but this is a pretty easy one to ID because ends up being generally a giant leaf. And not only that, but the petiole and the rachis of these leaves have these sharp prickles all over them. And that makes them pretty easy to ID. So then we'll get in the comparison game. So I'm going to go quickly. But on the left, we have red mulberry, a big heart-shaped leaf, bigger than your hand. And then on the right, we have American basswood, another big heart-shaped leaf. But they're very different. When you feel the red mulberry, the top of the leaf has kind of got a rough surface, almost like sandpaper. And when you break the leaf off and you look at the petiole, it exudes a milky sap. Versus the smooth leaves of American basswood, that does not exude a milky sap. And then, of course, red mulberry, many of you maybe know, you'll have multiple lobes on those leaves, and then red mulberry produces a fruit that most people love to eat. And then American basswood doesn't. It actually produces these seeds, and it's a leaf-like structure with the little seeds hanging. And I was taught a long time ago, 1995 or 6, one of my professors said it looked like a bass lure, the seeds. And in the small heart-shaped leaves, the little perfect leaves, notice an entire smooth margin here, simple alternate arrangement, eastern redbud. And then we get into the elms, and elms have an inequilateral base. So if you look at the base of that American elm on the left, the base does not match up on both sides. So we call that inequilateral. That's going to be Ulmaceae. That's going to be your elms. American elms, rough typically. Sometimes a young one's very sandpapery on the top, but not on the bottom. And on the left, we have slippery elm, which is not slippery at all. That's getting into the inner bark. That's what it's referring to. But the leaves are very rough and sandpapery on both sides. And then even the twigs. So you can see on the right, the slippery elm twig is very sandpapery or rough. And then, of course, the buds there, they're not glabrous like American elm, which you see on the left. They actually are kind of got that rusty, velvety pubescence all over. And then winged elm, the leaves tend to be more uniform in size, more kind of oval shaped and smooth. And then we get into the hackberry on the left versus the sugarberry on the right. So hackberry, you can see the teeth or tooth margin starts almost at the base, whereas sugarberry on the right, the teeth are generally above the middle part of the leaf near the tip or the apex. And I'm telling you, yeah, leaf ID can be very challenging. So the top one, that is going to be American hornbeam. And American hornbeam has kind of a tattered looking edge, but it's doubly serrate. But same goes for eastern hop hornbeam on the bottom. So the bottom two pictures, eastern hop hornbeam. Both of them can be referred to as musclewood. Some people refer to them as ironwood. Actually, both can be referred to as ironwood. American hornbeam is sometimes referred to as musclewood. But one thing I've noticed, the buds are totally different, the bark's totally different. But another thing about the leaves, eastern hop hornbeam leaves tend not to be very uniform in size. And then later in the summer, about midsummer, they tend to really look tattered and worn. But there you can see American hornbeam or the musclewood on the left versus the very different bark on the right of eastern hop hornbeam. And then here we have two species that could easily be confused based on the leaves. So black gum tends to balloon out, sharp tip, curved, versus common persimmon. But notice common persimmon, the leaf base is kind of rounded and tends to be more oval in shape. But man, if you look at the twigs, you look at the growth form of the tree, it's not too bad. Common persimmon later in the summer gets a fungal infection that causes the what appears to be like bruising or brown and black spots. All right, so now I'm wrapping up. So here we've got compound leaves. It has leaflets. It's alternate arrangement, so we're in the hickory group. And the hickories are just tough. Pig nut tends to have 5 leaflets, which is on the left. But so does shagbark, tends to have 5 leaflets on the right. Some people will say shagbark, the terminal leaflet, tends to be larger or sometimes much larger. But either way, you got to get into the finer details to really separate these out. But based on bark and site conditions, it's usually not too bad to differentiate your hickories. I will show you this. So this is a shagbark hickory. So with a hand lens, though, you can see the tufts of hair coming off those the teeth of the leaflets. So that's going to be an indicator of what you have with shagbark. Whereas, go back, pignut hickory, Carya glabra. Glabra means smooth. So no hair, it's hairless. So I just want to throw a shout out to Dr. Merker, Dr. Buckley, and some others that helped publish this, but identifying hickories and walnut trees. And you can see it's a very good publication and very handy when you get into hickory ID. All right. And then we have sumacs, smooth on the left, winged on the right. Smooth sumac leaflets have teeth. Winged sumac leaflets are smooth or entire. And then the winged sumac has leafy wings on the rachis. It's also called shining sumac because you can see the shiny leaves. So there's just a lot to this. And then when you break a leaf off of a sumac, it's going to exude a milky sap. And there are other species besides this. And like I said, I'm wrapping up, so hang tight if you're even still on there. I can't see folks. Okay. That would be embarrassing if nobody's on here. Next up, we've got, again, flowers and fruit. So the middle picture, you have winged sumac and the flowers kind of droop, whereas the flowers of smooth sumac on the right, they stand erect. And you'll see the same thing, that smooth sumac on the top left, the erect fruit, versus the drooping, more maroon fruit, not as rich red, but more maroon, of the winged sumac on the bottom left. I will say sumac flowers are very attractive to bees, many species of bees, particularly honeybees. So be a detective, look up, look down, look all around, always be a detective. and look at more than just the leaves. You need multiple characteristics to identify trees. And then last, I've had a lot of people influence me, particularly with trees. So this is one of those things. It's like iron sharpens iron. So if you have people like that you can hang out with, that challenge you, and not, it can be fun. Tree ID should be fun. But I've had a lot of people influence me and help kind of me throughout my career in regards to forest conservation, but with tree ID especially, those are a few that I need to give a shout out to. But thanks for your time. I know it was long, and yeah, I appreciate this opportunity, and maybe this is it as far as my webinars. Thanks.
I doubt that. There's so many questions already in the chat for you. So this was a great talk. Katie, I'll go ahead and I'll let you take over because we have only a few minutes and it looks like there's a lot of questions. So I'll let you get on it.
Yes. And then also real quick, I am going to share the QR code for people who are seeking CEUs. This is just another extra step we do in order to make sure you get your credits. But I'm going to dive right into the questions, and if you have to jump off, understand. But I'm going to get to those questions. So first one, this person said, I've read that fast-growing tree species tend to leaf out earlier than slow, longer-lived tree species. Is that a general rule?
Mm, yeah, that's kind of a little dangerous because if you conduct a timber harvest or cut a tree and then it sprouts, there's that rootstock there. So those grow extremely rapidly. You go from one trunk, for example, to 11 stems. Those grow super fast. So I'd be careful with the generalities on that.
Next one, a person, when you made the comment about weeping willows, a person asked, what are the downsides to planting those?
Yeah, that's a good question. Weeping willow, um, it is susceptible to, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. I know there's all these tree specialists out there like, oh, it's this, it's this, it's it. I can't remember it right off because my brain's fried. But first of all, I would just say it's not native. So again, we really need to be promoting native species. I can't say that enough, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I could hold an easy lecture covering a lot of so many reasons why we need to be planting native. So that's number one. But also they can get sick and succumb to I can't remember the name of it. I'll think of it and I'll send it to you and we'll send it out.
Next question. For Father's Day, this person is planting longleaf pines
Oh
in
yeah.
in East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee. Do you have any tips for success other than deep watering? Have you seen longleafs growing well in Tennessee?
Yeah, so that's my favorite tree, Pinus palustris. We won't go into all that, but I spent a lot of time with landowners and on public lands managing longleaf and doing a lot of longleaf restoration. So an awesome tree, but no, they don't look quite right here in Tennessee and North Carolina on this side of the state near the mountains. They just don't look like they do in the deep south. They're not as stately and beautiful. They kind of look rough. So I don't think you'll be able to change that through watering and other means, but it'd be really cool to have them, just as an example. It is a native tree and it's not likely to spread beyond its planting here in our state.
Um, Next question. Do you recommend a good book that's comprehensive and has a lot of the information that you shared today, especially for native trees here in Tennessee?
Yeah, I've got this is a book that it's a field guide or whatever. It's this I don't know, maybe it's backwards for y'all. I had the oak leaf on it and I showed it in a slide. Native Trees of the Southeast, an identification guide. So that's the one we've been using with our students because the Samuelson guide is no longer available.
All right, I do have a few more questions. I know it's 1 o'clock, so if people need to log off, Chris, are you good to keep answering these questions?
This is my job.
Okay, great. Um, can you name a few of your favorite underplanted trees in Middle Tennessee?
Oh, yeah, Middle Tennessee. y'all shouldn't have trees. No offense. You should be it's the Great Barrens. I mean, if you look up the history of Middle Tennessee, it was the Barrens. And y'all have a lot of eastern red cedar. You have a lot of chinkapin oak. So I'm not saying it was treeless, but it just about was treeless if you think about 300 or 400 years ago. Um, but yeah, it depends on your objectives as far as an understory species. But and if you're in the Central Basin, though, you really need to look into species that are adapted to, kind of the limestone or alkaline sites, and that occur with, yeah, the eastern red cedar and chinkapin especially. But man, I should be able to give you a few species. I can come back to that because that's one I would probably need to come back to. If you'll get this person's email, then I'll email them a good list instead of just something off the top of my head.
Okay. Um, this person would love some tips on distinguishing between lookalikes, such as white versus red mulberry, young basswood versus red mulberry, tails for red oak versus hickory, etc.
Hmm. Um, yeah, so white mulberry tends to have a glossy leaf, and the leaves tend to be smaller. Not always, but often. And white mulberry is invasive. The fruit is delicious, though, but it is invasive. But look for those glossy leaves on white mulberry. And then I think I went over the differences between red mulberry and basswood, so I won't maybe repeat that necessarily. But as far as oak and hickory, I didn't quite follow that. That's getting into a lot of details because there are a lot of species of hickory and oak. But I would highly recommend this person look at that hickory publication that Dr. Merker and those have, and that I mentioned in the PowerPoint. But yeah, there's a bunch of oaks. I would pay attention to which one are the bottomland oaks and which ones are the upland oaks. Separate them there first and then start on your list.
And this might be too similar to the last question, but just let me know. This person asked for tips on identifying oaks when not in a mast year.
Hmm. Um, I mean, they're still usually going to produce some mast, and the seeds or acorns can be helpful. But I'm using other characteristics to identify oaks, looking at the twigs and buds in particular with the bark. Um, like I mentioned, the buds being the DNA fingerprint. And then you can look for leaves laying on the ground and, pick those up. And it's sometimes in a forest setting that it's hard to, did this leaf come from that tree and so on. But usually you can figure it out with a little detective work.
This person works with an outdoor education program for adults in a non-conventional setting. They are looking for suggestions to help develop some tree ID activities for these students. They're looking for easy options since they don't have access to many supplies.
Okay, I zoned out. Somebody's talking about hackberries in here and I saw them. Will you repeat that one?
Yeah. This person works with an outdoor education program for adults in a non-conventional setting. They're looking for suggestions to develop some tree ID activities for these students. They're looking for easy options since they don't have access to many supplies.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the newer generation, they're all about the app thing. And probably all of them, if they're 14 years old and older, they're going to have a phone. So if you can lead them to that free Seek app or, the iNaturalist stuff, some of those apps that are out there that are free, then and incorporate that in the lesson, then that gets them more excited about it because these kids, they love to use their phones. It's a problem. But if you can now marry the phone to um, the trees, then the forest and conservation, and that's ultimately a really good thing, maybe to consider.
Would you suggest the same for adults?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, I've got a brother-in-law, and he's now crazy about this Merlin app that's free. So he's walking around everywhere he goes. He's listening to birds, recording birds, and then trying to figure out, what species is around him. So, yep.
Um, and then I know you got distracted by that comment about hackberries.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought I mentioned it. What the heck? Anyway, yeah, so common hackberry and sugarberry, so they're pretty similar. But is that a question that I didn't mention hackberry or something? Because I looked at that and I thought, well,
Oh,
I about it.
sorry, it was the second part of a question that I missed. They asked about the differences between hackberry and sugarberry.
Oh, okay. Well, I covered that. They were probably eating a donut or something, I guess, since it's lunchtime. But common hackberry, is more of an upland species, but I see it in bottomlands too. So it's kind of a site generalist, whereas sugarberry does tend to be more in the floodplain. Here in Tennessee, sugarberry, you're going to pick it up more in West Tennessee. But yeah, if you look at those leaves of hackberry, the leaves of hackberry have that kind of jagged edge or teeth from the base all the way up to the tip. They're very similar though.
All
Don't try to
right.
push one over like if you've got a big hackberry, don't try to push it over the bulldozer. I was working with a dozer operator trying to do that, and it was all that little D6 dozer could handle. Yeah.
Um, this person asked, would you eliminate Bradford pears immediately or let them expire naturally? HOA planted many in early 2000s.
Yes, I've always said I'm going to get arrested someday for stopping in somebody's driveway and cutting them all down. Just I'm gonna lose my mind. So yeah, I'm always with immediately because they're producing seeds. And then, as you know, or maybe folks know, the birds especially, they're gorging themselves on the seeds, and birds are largely planting them uh, for miles, across the landscape. So immediate is much better. And yeah, cutting those trees down, and it's a real pain to work up a Bradford pear. I've done that a lot. And but the good thing is they're not the wild calorie pear at that point, so you don't have the thorns on the domestic trees in the yards. But yeah, when you cut that tree down, you need to treat the cambium layer, the outer ring of the stump, and the cheapest method there would be the glyphosate product. So something like Cornerstone Plus, it's got a 41% active ingredient. So half glyphosate or Cornerstone Plus with half water. Mix those two together and then just immediately after it's cut, treat the outside of the stump and then that'll prevent them from sprouting.
All right. Well, I believe those are all the questions. So imagine I'll turn it back to you to wrap up.
Okay, I think we got through most of the questions. Again, this is going to be available for YouTube and it'll be public access if you want to review this again. I know I'm sure I will as well. And thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And again, I don't think this is the last time that you'll be on this webinar series, but thank you so much and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.